Welcome to OOTO TV, the out-of-the-office investigation from the past into the future of personal health and actualization. This time, we're discussing sunlight, UV, and light, health, mood, and skin effects. Hello, and welcome to OOTO TV. I'm Sue, and today, we're diving into something truly fundamental to our wellness, light itself. Our focus today, using the sources you've shared, is to explore how light exposure, everything from the sun's full spectrum down to really specific light therapies isn't just superficial. It actually fundamentally drives our physical health, our mental state, and even how our skin functions.
And I'm Bob. And yet this investigation goes way beyond just slip, slop, slap. We're really looking at the scope here, examining light's dual nature. You've got these huge benefits preventing disease, setting our internal clocks, but then that's set against the very real risks of UV exposure we all know about. We'll dig into some critical findings, things like light deprivation in certain groups, how phototherapy works at a cellular level, and even natural protection like melanin.
Right, and if there's one core idea to grasp right away, it's this. Sunlight, UV, and light directly impact physical health, mental mood, and skin. That really comes through loud and clear from the material.
Absolutely. And, to really bring it home for you listening, your personal interaction with sunlight, UV, and light significantly impacts health, mood, and is the primary driver of the circadian cycle. It's deeply personal. Let's maybe start with the mental health side. It's quite surprising.
Yeah, that profound impact of sunlight on mental state, it really hit home with that study on operating room nurses, the ORNs. I mean, these are people working in environments, sterile, often windowless, right? So they naturally get very low doses of sunlight. What actually happens then?
Well, the study gives a pretty stark answer. These nurses, they reported significantly higher levels of psychological distress. Their average score on the K-10 scale, that's a standard measure, was 25.41. Now, putting that number into context, it's considered quite high. It suggests poorer mental health compared to, say, the general population.
Wow, okay, so there's a measurable mental health cost there, especially for these specific professionals. But there was good news too, wasn't there? Something critical the researchers observed.
Yes, absolutely. They found that poor mental health was negatively associated with more sunlight exposure per day. Basically, the more time these nurses managed to spend in sunlight, the lower their distress scores tended to be. And what's more, that light exposure was also linked pretty closely with better sleep regularity.
Okay, so even relatively small amounts of thoughtful exposure could be a powerful tool against stress and sleep issues, particularly if you're in a situation where you're light deprived. Which leads us to a really key question, I think. Can thoughtful management of light actually improve mental health and sleep, just as this study suggests?
The answer seems to be a definite yes. Exposure to sunlight, UV, and light improves health, mood, and skin. And it does this through several interconnected mechanisms in the body. First, the one everyone knows, vitamin D production. Deficiency there is strongly linked to a higher risk of depression. And that's a real issue, especially in those low UV winter months like December, January.
Right, the vitamin D connection is pretty well established. But what else is going on inside us when we get that light exposure?
Well, second, light is the main external cue that regulates our circadian cortisol rhythm. Cortisol, the stress hormone. It correlates highly with mental health scores. So if that light cue is weak or maybe timed wrong, that whole rhythm gets thrown off, leading to more systemic stress. And third, light exposure often goes hand in hand with physical activity, right? Which itself boosts mental outlook through various means, like supporting neuroplasticity and cutting inflammation.
Okay, so if cortisol is tied to the internal stress clock, how does light play into our actual 24-hour sleep-wake cycle, the melatonin part of the equation?
That's where light is really the boss. Getting bright light, especially first thing in the morning, sends this powerful signal to your brain. It basically slams the brakes on nighttime melatonin production. That's the hormone that makes you feel sleepy. So morning light effectively shifts your melatonin rhythm earlier. And it's this timing effect, this phase advance, that makes light therapy so effective for things rooted in bad timing, like insomnia, seasonal affective disorder, or SAD, and even premenstrual syndrome.
That's like a master switch for our internal clocks. So based on the sources, it seems clear how sunlight, UV, and light improve health, mood, and skin effects. It's through regulating this intricate internal chemistry, right? From cortisol and melatonin timing to making essential vitamin D. It sounds simple, but the effects are just profound. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit from why we need light to that kind of razor's edge, the risk versus reward paradox.
Exactly. This is where we have to balance the absolute necessity of light against the known dangers of getting too much. I mean, historically, light therapy was used for all sorts of things, rickets, even tuberculosis. It shows our connection to sunlight is ancient. It's essential.
And the sheer regulatory power is amazing. You mentioned vitamin D, synthesized through UVB exposure, acting like a major hormone, regulating, over 1,000 different genes in almost every tissue. That's incredible. It means light is involved in just fundamental system upkeep.
It really is. And to grasp the risk balance properly, we need to look at the numbers through this lens of disability-adjusted life years, DALYs. It measures healthy life lost. And the paradox here is, frankly, shocking. The global disease burden from too much UVR, think sunburn, overexposure that accounts for just 0.1% of total day lives.
0.1%. That's the risk we hear about constantly, that tiny fraction.
Precisely. Now compare that to the burden from too little UVR exposure. Deficiency, basically light deprivation, is linked to this enormous annual disease burden, 3.3 billion dailies worldwide. And that's associated with things like musculoskeletal disorders and, crucially, a higher risk of serious internal cancers, Hodgkin lymphoma, breast, colon, pancreatic cancer.
Hold on. If the risk from excess is 0.1% and the risk from deficiency is tied to 3.3 billion dailies, that implies the disease burden from staying indoors, from not getting enough light, is astronomically larger than the burden from getting too much sun. That statistic just completely flips the script on the usual public health message, doesn't it? It makes you wonder if the intense focus for decades on that 0.1% risk might have sort of inadvertently pushed us towards this massive deficiency problem.
It certainly forces us to acknowledge that we as humans evolved using light as a fundamental signaling mechanism, not just optional.
And speaking of signaling, this is where it got really fascinating for me, the hormonal connection. Some studies suggesting that UVB hitting the skin, not the eyes, the skin can actually trigger increases in sex hormones like testosterone and estrogen, and even apparently the desire to mate. And this maps onto seasonal changes.
It's a direct link, between natural light cycles and, reproductive fitness. It shows light acts as this systemic regulator way beyond just making vitamin D. It seems to be directly involved in really primary biological drives.
You're listening to OOTOTV with research by author Paul Bulow. If that holds true, are we suggesting our biology actually nudges us towards seasonal shifts in social behavior based purely on UVB hitting our skin? That's kind of mind-blowing. Does that effect really seem consistent across different groups?
The source material is pretty consistent. The light acts as a powerful cue, It reinforces how responsive our internal chemistry is to the sun. But, despite this huge list of benefits, we absolutely have to circle back and give that necessary caution. Address the 10% risk factor, as you put it. UVA rays, they penetrate deep, contributing to photoaging and indirectly to cancer by creating DNA-damaging molecules. UVB causes sunburn and damages DNA directly. The risks are definitely real, even if, statistically, may be lower than the deficiency risk.
And I think that's vital to pause on, that 0.1% risk. We have to acknowledge that even if the global burden percentage is low, skin cancer itself is a real scary outcome. Public health has to address it. It's not like it's an either situation.
That's an excellent point. It's absolutely not zero-sum, and that's why balancing the data is so crucial. And we also need to factor in those contradictory data points we came across. Not literally every single study lines up perfectly. Remember that one study? Spanish university grads in areas with more daylight hours actually reported a higher risk of depression.
Right. So it suggests the issue isn't just amount of light, maybe. Perhaps it's tied to the lifestyle of someone spending long hours in the sun, possibly neglecting other things like sleep or, activity factors.
Exactly. And there was data showing that using tanning beds a lot, prolonged, intense exposure, actually increased unhealthy psychological symptoms. It really hammers home that dose and intensity matter hugely. Too much, even if you're seeking a benefit, can flip into being harmful. Which brings us right back to that critical balancing question. What are key elements for sunlight, UV, and light? Health, mood, and skin health that really help us strike that balance between risk and reward.
The advice on moderation, despite all the complexity around skin type, latitude, and so on, it actually seems pretty consistent across the board.
It does, surprisingly so. The absolute key is never exposing your skin long enough for it to get red or burn. Simple as that. Use sun protection when the UV index climbs over 3. And interestingly, brief, repeated exposures seem to be more efficient for vitamin D production than one long, damaging session. It's about getting the benefit without piling on the risk.
That's the practical takeaway we need. Okay, let's pivot now to our own built-in defenses, starting with melanin.
Ah, melanin. It's spectacular stuff. The body's own UV absorber, antioxidant, radical scavenger. It's this natural defense that gives darker skin such profound protection against skin cancer.
And the difference is just enormous, isn't it? Melanin gives something like a 500 to 1,000-fold lower risk of skin cancer in dark skin, but only maybe a 10 to 15-fold protection against just getting red, against erythema.
Exactly. But this points straight to that evolutionary trade-off, which is a major challenge for public health today. Darker skin needs about 5 to 6 times more sun exposure than pale skin to make the same amount of vitamin D. So when modern life shifts everyone indoors, regardless of skin color, people with darker skin are at a much higher risk of vitamin D deficiency and all the health issues linked to that.
Now, we should probably neutrally mention that a more extreme perspective we saw in one source, the one arguing the medical establishment sort of demonizes sunlight. This view suggests sun avoidance is creating widespread light deficiency and even puts forward the idea that melanin might protect against other things, like specifically mentioned microwave radiation, like 5G.
Yeah, that specific claim about 5G is definitely outside the established scientific consensus on light therapy. But I think it highlights where public mistrust can go when the risks of sun exposure are maybe communicated without enough emphasis on the very real, very significant benefits of getting enough light safely. It just underscores how vital, balanced, intelligent communication from health experts really is.
Right. Okay. Let's move towards solutions that try to isolate the good parts of light. Targeted phototherapies. What can something like red light therapy, RLT, offer that maybe the sun can't?
Well, RLT offers really specific isolated benefits, things like speeding up wound healing, reducing psoriasis flare-ups, relieving pain. It does this because it uses just red and near-infrared wavelengths, deliberately cutting out the harmful UV. Managing psoriasis, for instance, can be safer with RLT because the UV in sunlight might actually make it worse for some people.
So what's the mechanism? How does RLT actually work to, say, improve skin youthfulness or reduce scarring? What's happening?
It's all about cellular energy, basically.
Yeah.
RLT light penetrates deep into tissues, and it activates the mitochondria, the powerhouses inside our cells. This activation ramps up ATP production, which is cellular energy. But crucially, it also directly lowers the amount of reactive oxygen species, ROS. You can think of ROS as damaging exhaust fumes from cell processes. So RLT essentially helps clean up the cell's internal environment, reducing the oxidative stress that's linked to cell damage and photoaging. This grounding in mitochondrial function is what makes those claims about RLT improving skin youthfulness and reducing scars scientifically plausible.
You're listening to OOTO TV with research by author Paul Boileau.
And beyond RLT, there was some fascinating stuff on natural topicals offering photoprotection too. Lots of effective plant-based antioxidants, tocopherols, flavonoids, phenolic acids are being looked at, like the catechins in green tea. They seem to help prevent and repair skin damage and have strong anti-inflammatory effects, which is great for sunburn relief.
And what about internal protection, like using nutrition as a kind of sun shield?
Oh, absolutely. Taking carotenoids orally, things like lycopene, beta-carotene, allows these compounds to actually build up in your skin. And once they're there, they help fight off the inflammatory response triggered by UV light. The data suggests these supplements might offer a sun protective effect roughly equivalent to an SPF of up to 5. It just shows that what you eat is a really crucial part of holistic sun protection.
Okay, so we've really established this need for light balance. Even that low-dose exposure, like with the RRN study, matters significantly for mood. We've confirmed light is just fundamental regulating mood, hormones, immunity, sleep, but always, always balanced against the risks of photoaging and skin cancer.
That really is the core synthesis of this whole investigation, isn't it?
So the big final question then, considering all these interconnected systems, vitamin D, melanin, melatonin, hormones, can thoughtful management of light exposure truly improve health, mood, and skin effects?
Unequivocally, yes. The research strongly indicates that the best path forward involves using both broadband sunlight safely, moderately, never burning, and also strategically using targeted therapies like RLT for specific problems like inflammation or speeding up healing. The complexity isn't something to fear. It just requires intelligence and moderation in our approach.
Which lets us state with real confidence, thoughtful management of exposure to sunlight maintains a healthy physiological system and mental outlook.
The research absolutely confirms it. Our bodies are biologically wired to need and use light for overall system regulation. It's not an optional extra.
And maybe this leaves us with a final provocative thought for you, the listener. That complex interplay between melanin and vitamin D synthesis, it's such a powerful example of how we've adapted evolutionarily to different light levels around the world. So, when individuals today spend most of their time indoors, regardless of their natural skin type, they're essentially operating against their own biological programming. And that potentially increases risks for internal cancers or mood disorders. We really have to find ways to safely reintegrate natural light exposure, that original essential fuel, back into our modern, mostly indoor lives.
We certainly hope this investigation gives you some context and maybe some tools to help find that crucial balance for yourself.
Thank you so much for joining us for this investigation on OOTO TV.
We look forward to exploring more with you next time.
You're listening to OOTO TV with research by author Paul Bulow.